Looks like we're taking a deep dive into cybersecurity and privacy today. You've given us a ton of sources to dig into. So let's get started pulling out the key insights and get you on the road to building a really strong program for your organization.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so right off the bat, one thing that really caught my eye from these sources was the emphasis on starting with a solid foundation.
Absolutely. It's like building a house. You need a strong foundation, those solid blueprints, before you even think about, laying the first brick.
And when we talk about that foundation in cybersecurity, we're talking about policies, right?
Exactly. Cybersecurity and privacy policies. Those are your blueprints.
So it's not just about compliance or checking boxes.
No, not at all. These policies actually help align security practices with your business goals. And you know what? They can even be a competitive advantage.
Oh, really? I'm curious, how so?
Well, one of the sources talked about a clothing retailer. They used their privacy policy to boost customer trust, and you know what? It actually increased their sales.
Interesting. What did they do that was so special?
They were just super transparent about how they collect and use data, gave users granular control over their preferences, really put the power in their hands.
Wow, so they flipped the script. Instead of seeing privacy as a burden, they turned it into a selling point.
Exactly. And that proactive approach really resonated with customers. It helped them stand out in a crowded market.
So it's not just about protecting your organization. It's about building trust with your users.
Right. It shows you respect them and their data.
Yeah.
And you know that trust can translate into loyalty and ultimately a stronger bottom line.
Okay, so we've established that those policies aren't just paperwork. They're essential for building a resilient and trustworthy organization.
Couldn't agree more.
Which brings me to our next point. One of the sources compared risk assessment to a detective investigating a case, carefully examining every nook and cranny to uncover potential weaknesses. Love that analogy.
Yeah, it's a great way to visualize it. A thorough risk assessment helps you pinpoint those vulnerabilities, where your organization might be exposed.
Right. And you know what really stood out to me was the emphasis on the NIST framework.
Yeah, the NIST framework is a great resource. It's a set of guidelines, really a roadmap, to help organizations manage and reduce cybersecurity risks.
One of our sources talked about a manufacturing company that used the NIST framework, and they were able to streamline their security practices and significantly reduce their risk of cyber attacks.
That's awesome. And the great thing about the NIST framework is it's not one size fits all. Organizations can customize it to fit their specific needs and industry regulations.
It's like a toolbox full of different tools, and you get to pick and choose which ones work best for you.
That's a great way to put it. You're building your own custom security toolkit.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of a strong foundation with those clear policies, and we've touched on the crucial role of risk assessment. So where do we go from here?
Well, all of this leads us right into building a privacy-focused cybersecurity program. And you know what struck me about these sources on this topic? It's their positive and user-friendly tone.
Yeah, I noticed that too. It's refreshing. They're not just doom and gloom, scaring us with all the potential threats out there.
Exactly. They emphasize that privacy isn't just about, preventing data breaches, but it's about responsible data handling, treating data with care.
And respecting those users.
Yeah.
Wow. Showing them that you value their privacy.
Absolutely. It's about building trust with your users and showing them that you're a responsible steward of their information.
Okay, so how do we actually build a privacy-focused program? Where do we start?
One of our sources, it actually breaks it down into 6 key areas: data minimization, encryption, user education, privacy policies, regular audits and assessments, and user control. We can tackle those one by one.
That sounds like a great roadmap. Let's start with data minimization. What exactly does that mean? I've heard the phrase less is more, but how does that apply here?
Well, it's pretty simple, really. Collect only the data you absolutely need.
Okay, so just the essentials. But why is that so important for privacy?
One of the sources, it had this case study. It was about a healthcare provider, and they were initially collecting a ton of patient data.
They thought it might be useful down the road.
Yeah, exactly, for future research and whatnot. But it ended up creating a huge risk of exposure. They were basically a bigger target for hackers.
Oh, I see. More data means more risk.
Exactly. So they changed their practices, started minimizing the data they collected, and you know what? It actually streamlined their processes and reduced their storage costs.
So it's a win-win. Less risk, lower costs, and greater privacy.
You got it.
Okay, so data minimization. Check. What's next on our list?
Let's talk about encryption. I like how one of the articles explained this. They compared it to putting your sensitive information in a lockbox.
Ah, so even if someone gets their hands on the data, It's useless without the key.
Exactly. That's the power of encryption. It scrambles the data, making it unreadable without the proper decryption key.
So it's like a shield protecting that sensitive information.
Precisely. And you know what? One of the sources, it had a report on data breaches, and they highlighted a case where a company, their customer database was stolen, but because they used strong encryption, the hackers couldn't access the sensitive information, like those credit card numbers and social security numbers.
Wow, that's a real lifesaver.
Yeah,
Encryption really can be the difference between a minor incident and a full-blown catastrophe.
you said it. It's essential.
Okay, so we've got data minimization and encryption. What about user education? What role does that play in a privacy-focused program?
User education. It's all about empowering your users. Give them the knowledge and tools to protect themselves, and in turn, they protect the organization.
I like that. So it's like training an army to defend against cyber threats.
Exactly. You need your users to be informed and aware of the risks.
So no more boring lectures or those cheesy training videos.
One of the sources actually talked about a tech company, and get this, they implemented a gamified cybersecurity training program.
Oh, wow. That sounds fun.
Yeah. They ditched the boring lectures and created interactive modules with real-world scenarios. And you know what? They even had rewards for completing the training.
That's a great way to make cybersecurity engaging. Get people excited about learning.
Exactly. Make it fun and relevant.
Okay, so we've covered data minimization, encryption, and user education. Feeling good? What's next on our checklist?
Let's dive into privacy policies. Remember, these need to be clear, concise, and easy to find.
It's all about transparency, right?
Yeah.
Letting those users know exactly how their data is being collected, used, and protected.
That's the key. And some companies are doing this really well. One of the articles highlighted a few examples. They're using simple language, visuals, and even interactive tools to make those privacy policies easy to understand.
That's awesome. Making privacy accessible and empowering users to make those informed decisions about their data.
Right. And you know, it goes a long way in building trust.
Okay, so we've checked off data minimization, encryption, user education, and privacy policies. What are those last two components we need to hit?
They are regular audits and assessments and user control.
Okay, let's start with audits and assessments. What's the key takeaway there?
Think of them as like a regular checkup, but for your organization's security.
Okay, like preventative maintenance. Catch those small issues before they become big problems.
Exactly. And one of our sources actually mentioned a case where a company, they uncovered a potential security vulnerability during a routine audit. And because they caught it early, they were able to fix it before any damage was done.
That's a great example of why those regular checks are so important. It's like having a security expert come in and give your systems a thorough once-over.
Absolutely. And those audits, they can help you identify areas for improvement and make sure you're staying on top of those evolving threats.
So it's all about being proactive.
You got it.
Okay, so regular audits and assessments, check. What about that last component, user control?
User control. That's all about empowering your users, giving them more control over their own data.
So what does that look like in practice?
Think about those options for, opting out of data collection, managing privacy settings, maybe even deleting their accounts entirely. It's all about giving them choices.
Choices and transparency. One of the sources mentioned a company that got rave reviews for its user control options.
Oh, yeah. What were they doing?
Users could easily access their data, download it, even request to have it deleted. And you know what? It actually increased customer loyalty and trust.
Wow. So giving users more control actually made them feel more connected to the company.
Exactly. It's counterintuitive, but it works. People appreciate being in control of their information.
And it shows that you respect them and their choices.
Okay, so we've covered all 6 components of a privacy-focused program. Data minimization, encryption, user education, privacy policies, regular audits and assessments, and user control. We've got a solid foundation. We've done our risk assessment, and we're ready to build.
Sounds like we're off to a great start.
I'm feeling pumped. We've covered so much ground already, and I feel like we're just getting started. There's so much more to explore in the world of cybersecurity and privacy. But we'll be back in just a moment to continue our deep dive.
Can't wait.
Okay, so we're back and ready to dive deeper into this world of cybersecurity and privacy. In that last part, we laid out some key building blocks for creating a solid program, but there's another layer I want to unpack here. It's the human side of all of this.
Oh, absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in those technical details, firewalls, encryption, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, it's the people who make or break your security.
Right, the human factor. What really struck me was this stat from one of the sources. It said human error is a factor in over 90% of security breaches.
Wow, 90%. That's
It
huge.
is right. It really highlights how important it is to create a culture of security awareness. It's not enough to just have the tools. You need people who are trained to use them well and who understand why it all matters.
I completely agree. One of the sources talks about a financial institution that completely transformed their security by really focusing on employee training and awareness. They made phishing simulations mandatory and provided ongoing education on those best practices.
I love that. It's not just a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process.
Exactly. You got to keep security top of mind.
And that's where leadership comes in, right?
Hmm.
One source I was looking at was an interview with a cybersecurity expert, and they were really emphasizing how leaders need to be those champions for privacy, not just talking the talk, but walking the walk.
Oh, for sure. Leading by example is so important. Think about it. If your CEO is clicking on phishing links or sharing sensitive information carelessly, what kind of message does that send to everyone else?
Right. It sets the tone for the entire organization. Another source, a report on building a culture of security, it really stressed the importance of open communication.
Yeah, that open communication is essential. Employees need to feel comfortable raising concerns about potential risks, without being afraid of any kind of backlash.
Right. It creates that environment of trust where everyone feels responsible for security.
Exactly. A sense of shared ownership. It's not just the IT department's problem, it's everyone's responsibility.
And you know what else I thought was interesting? One of the sources talked about adaptability, how the threat landscape is constantly changing, so you need to be ready to adjust and evolve your approach.
Oh, definitely. It's like playing a game of chess. You have to anticipate your opponent's moves and be ready to change your strategy.
Right. But in cybersecurity, your opponent is constantly coming up with new and creative ways to attack. It's a real challenge to stay ahead of the curve.
One thing that can really help is staying informed about those latest threats and vulnerabilities. There are tons of resources out there, like security alerts and those threat intelligence feeds.
Yeah, those are great for staying in the loop.
Yeah.
One source I was reading actually recommended subscribing to a few of those to get those real-time updates.
Absolutely. It's so much better to be proactive than reactive. Don't wait for a breach to happen. Be ready for it.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the organization, but let's shift gears for a second and focus on the individual user. What can they do to protect themselves in this digital world?
Oh, there's a lot they can do. One simple but super effective thing is using strong, unique passwords for each online account. And you know what? I even recommend using a password manager. It takes all the guesswork out of creating and remembering those complex
Yeah,
passwords.
those password managers are lifesavers. I used to try to keep track of everything in my head, but it was a nightmare.
I hear you. So much easier to have a tool do it for you.
Speaking of things that make life easier, one of the sources mentioned being wary of phishing attempts. Apparently, those attacks are becoming really sophisticated these days.
Oh, tell me about it. They can look so real, like they're from your bank, a social media site, or even a friend. It's scary how convincing they can be.
Right, so how do we avoid falling for those tricks?
There's one simple thing you can do. Always hover over a link before you click on it, in an email or online. That way you can see the actual URL. If it looks suspicious or doesn't match the sender, it's a big red flag.
Such a good tip. It's easy to just click without thinking, especially if you're in a hurry, but taking that extra second can really save you from a lot of headaches.
Absolutely. Another thing that's crucial? Keeping your software up to date.
Oh, the dreaded updates.
I know. But those updates, they often include security patches that fix those known vulnerabilities. It's like putting on a fresh suit of armor.
Okay, that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah,
So it's worth the time and effort to make sure everything's up to date.
definitely. And speaking of protection, one source I was looking at was really emphasizing the importance of using a reputable antivirus software.
That's always a good idea. It's like having that extra layer of defense, scanning for anything suspicious that might try to sneak onto your device.
Exactly. Think of it like a security guard for your computer.
But cybersecurity isn't just about the technology and tools, right? It's also about being smart about what you share online.
Oh, for sure. One of the sources really stressed the importance of thinking before you post. Once you put something out there, it's hard to completely erase it. It's like a digital tattoo. It can stick with you for a long time.
That's a great analogy. It's a good reminder to be mindful of what we share online.
Absolutely. And another thing, be mindful of your privacy settings on social media. Make sure you're only sharing information with people you trust.
Good point.
Yeah.
And speaking of controlling what you share, One source even suggested going through your social media profiles and deleting any old posts or photos that you don't want out there anymore. It's like spring cleaning for your digital life.
I love that. We all need a little digital decluttering every now and then. It's good for our privacy and our peace of mind.
Absolutely. So it's about being proactive and taking control of your online identity.
Right. Don't just be a passive user. Be aware, be informed, and take those steps to protect yourself.
And that actually ties into another important concept we talked about earlier, data minimization. We touched on this in the context of organizations, but it applies to individuals as well.
For sure. It's about being mindful of the information you share online. Before you give your personal details to a website or app, stop and ask yourself, do they really need this information?
Right. It's about applying that filter, thinking before you share.
Exactly. Those long, complicated privacy policies? They can be tough to decipher.
I know. It's tempting to just click agree without
Yeah.
reading them.
But it's worth taking a few minutes to understand what you're agreeing to,
Yeah.
especially if you're sharing sensitive information. And if something seems unclear or unfair, don't be afraid to reach out to the company and ask for clarification.
Right. You have the right to know how your data is being used. It's about being an informed and empowered user. You have choices and you have a voice.
Absolutely. Privacy is not just about protecting yourself from harm. It's about maintaining that control over your personal information. You get to decide how it's used.
So it's about agency and autonomy in the online world, making conscious choices that reflect your values.
Well said. I think we've covered a lot of ground here in this part of our deep dive. We talked about the human side of cybersecurity, the importance of that culture of security, and those steps individuals can take to really protect their privacy online.
It's been a great conversation. But before we move on, there's one more area I want to touch on. We've talked about staying ahead of the curve when it comes to threats, but I want to dive a little deeper into some of those emerging trends and technologies. What's on the horizon in the world of cybersecurity?
Oh, there's so much happening right now. One of the sources I was looking at was talking about the rise of artificial intelligence, AI, how it's becoming a big player in both offensive and defensive cybersecurity.
AI, that's fascinating. I've heard about AI being used to create those super sophisticated phishing attacks, but how can it be used for good in cybersecurity?
Well, this report I was reading, it was talking about how AI-powered security systems can analyze huge amounts of data, to spot those patterns and anomalies that might point to a cyber attack. It's like having a superpowered security guard who's always on alert.
That's incredible. But it also makes me think about those ethical implications of AI and cybersecurity. One source I was looking at mentioned concerns about bias in AI algorithms.
Oh, yeah. Those are valid concerns. As with any powerful technology, you have to make sure AI is developed and used responsibly.
Right. It's about finding that balance between harnessing the power of AI to make us safer, but also making sure it doesn't infringe on privacy or human rights.
Absolutely. And speaking of the future, another trend that came up in a lot of the sources is cloud security.
Ah, yes, the cloud. It seems like everyone's moving their data and operations to the cloud these days.
They are. And as that happens, securing those cloud environments is becoming more and more critical. One source was talking about the shared responsibility model in cloud security, where the cloud provider and the customer both play a role.
So it's not just about relying on the cloud provider to handle everything.
Right. You have to take ownership of your own security in the cloud. Things like, strong access controls, encrypting data, and regular monitoring are all part of that.
So you're basically applying the same security principles you'd use on-site, but now in the cloud environment.
Exactly. And it's just as important to stay updated on the latest cloud security best practices and be aware of those emerging threats.
Right. It's a constantly evolving landscape, so you have to keep learning and adapting. But at the end of the day, no matter where your data is, it all comes back to those people involved.
Couldn't agree more. The human element is crucial. You can have all the fancy tools in the world, but if your people aren't trained to use them right, or if they don't get those security protocols, you're still at risk.
Okay, so we've explored those emerging trends, AI and the cloud, and we've circled back to that essential human element. It really is a multifaceted challenge.
It is. But with a good understanding of the basics, you can start building a strong program that addresses all those different aspects of security.
Well said. And you know what? I think we need to circle back to something we touched on earlier, user control and empowerment. It's such a critical part of a privacy-focused program, both for the organization and the individual.
Totally agree. And what's exciting? There's a growing movement towards data ownership and control. People are waking up to their rights and demanding more transparency and control over their data.
Yeah, and one of the sources was talking about how companies are turning data privacy into a competitive advantage. They're offering users more control, more choices, and you know what? It's actually increasing customer loyalty and trust.
It's amazing how that works, right? Give people control and they feel better about doing business with you. It's a win-win.
Absolutely. It's about shifting that mindset. Privacy isn't a burden. It's an opportunity to build better relationships with those users.
And to set yourself apart from the competition.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. We've covered so much ground in this deep dive, but I feel like we've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore. But we'll be back in just a moment to wrap up this episode and leave our listener with some final food for thought. All right, welcome back for the final part of our deep dive. I feel like we've been on quite a journey. Cybersecurity and privacy, we've covered so much, those strong foundations, staying ahead of the curve, even giving users more control over their data.
Yeah, it's been great. We've really dug into those sources.
You know, thinking about everything we've talked about, there's this one question that just keeps popping up in my mind.
I'm curious.
It's something that a lot of those sources touched on, but it really gets to the core of, what it means to build a program that's truly focused on privacy.
Okay, lay it on me.
We've talked about policies, risk assessments, technical measures. We even talked about user education, but how do we move beyond just checking those boxes? You know, how do we really champion that culture of privacy? What does it actually mean to make privacy a core value, not just something you have to do to comply?
That's a great question. And it's something that I think every organization out there needs to be thinking about. It's about moving beyond that reactive approach, just trying to avoid getting in trouble.
Right. It's about being proactive, making privacy a part of everything you do.
Exactly. One of the sources, it was talking about privacy by design.
Privacy by design.
Yeah. It's this idea that you should bake privacy into every aspect of your products and services right from the start.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like when you're building a house. You want to include security features in the blueprints right from the get-go. You don't want to try to add them on later as an afterthought.
Exactly. And it's not just about the technology or the design, it's about the people too. Creating that culture where everyone understands why privacy matters.
I like that. So it becomes everyone's responsibility, not just the IT department's job.
Right. One of the sources talk about privacy champions.
Privacy champions, huh?
Yeah, it's like they're these advocates for privacy within their teams and departments.
I love that. So you have these people who are really passionate about privacy, and they help spread the word and encourage those good practices throughout the organization.
Exactly. And you know what else is super important? Leadership.
Oh, yeah, for sure. One source was saying that leaders need to set the example, show that they're committed to privacy through their actions.
Couldn't agree more. Actions speak louder than words, right? When leaders prioritize privacy, it sends a powerful message to everyone.
So it's about creating that ripple effect. Starts at the top and spreads throughout the whole organization. But it's also about how organizations treat their customers. They interact with them.
Absolutely. One of the sources was talking about transparency and communication, being upfront with your customers about how you handle their data.
Right, giving them choices and control over their information, and making sure those privacy policies are clear and easy to understand.
It's all about building trust and exceeding expectations, going above and beyond what's required.
So it's not just about, checking the boxes and avoiding penalties. It's about making privacy a real differentiator, something that sets you apart and helps you build those strong relationships with your customers.
It's a win-win. You know you're doing the right thing, and your customers feel good about supporting you.
It's about thinking long-term, recognizing that privacy is more than just a compliance issue. It's essential for building trust, and in the end, it really does contribute to innovation and growth.
Well said. That's the big picture.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listener with a challenge. You've got all this great information now. So think about how you can go beyond just checking those boxes. Think about how you can make privacy a part of everything you do, a core value of your organization.
Yeah, ask yourself, what kind of legacy do you want to create?
It's time to take all of these insights and turn them into action. Build a cybersecurity program that's not just robust, but one that's really focused on privacy.
I'm excited to see what our listener comes up with.
Me too. And you know what? I'm feeling confident that with all of the knowledge they've gained from this deep dive, they're well equipped to tackle this challenge and create something truly special.
I have no doubt.
It's been an incredible journey exploring this world of cybersecurity and privacy with you.
Likewise.
And a huge thank you to our listener for giving us these sources to explore with you. We had a blast.
Thanks for listening, and good luck on your cybersecurity journey.
Remember, you're not alone in this. There's a whole community out there of people who are passionate about privacy. And keep learning, keep innovating, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible when it comes to protecting privacy in the digital world. Until next time, stay curious and stay secure.